So all of you or some of you can answer this. I'm sure you spend time with patients, but this is an opportunity to have a pretty large number of patients with a lot of diversity in diagnosis and even within diagnosis, the different phenotypes and issues people deal with. What has surprised you the most about things you heard from patients and families at this meeting that you think, may be something we need to focus on in our organizations?
Renette.
That's a great question.
Learning today and just speaking with patients that experience certain issues with medical food insurance coverage or working around the healthcare complexity, the system, and how it works, and learning that there are many sponsorships and programs and what may have you that can help, but there are additional support out there. And learning about Hearts Enteral, which is part of my company. I'm a medical reimbursement specialist. And not only do we help patients get covered, but we also now supply their food because of the challenges of a DME supplier in today's world. It's difficult finding a supplier to help keep our patients on their formula and afford their diet. And that's our job, is to now help support our patients and supply their products. I think that's very important, to have a supplier that will stand by and stretch their neck out a little further, helping patients.
I think we had this wonderful session a minute ago with all the adults living all their lives with all these disorders, giving tips to each other about what to do exactly with how to prepare the formula and what to do, little capsules about getting the betaine and taste better, and new gadgets that are coming along and help the patients with their everyday lives. I think these sessions, the family, the advocacy groups can help us collect all this feedback and say, when we set up that research agenda, really incorporate the patient first priorities and make this, set the priorities right. FDA cares about patient-reported outcomes and what matters for the families the most. So I think, yes, then go back to the nutritional companies and say, let's make these better formulas for our adult patients. They are moving to this different stage in life and they need special products that are targeted for them. So I think, yes, this is a wonderful feedback that we get from all of you to join forces and develop the next best thing for.
Thank you, Irene. I was sitting in the session across the hall, and I know someone was videotaping it. Any patients or families that weren't in that room, you want to watch the videotape. I learned a lot. I will also happy to tell you your suggestion, let's take all these tips as an organization and do something with them. Alex Orange Juice, is he in the room? All right, well, he has graciously volunteered to write up a pamphlet to collect all of these tips on what to do to make the formula more palatable, and he's going to work with Danae then to get it, published and on the website, et cetera, and there were other examples that came up in that room that someone should take control of as well. Alex should be a speaker for next year. He's also going to perform music. He's rock and roll and punk were the two I heard him say today.
What made you get into what you're doing?
Give me the mic. Well, first of all, I was going to make a comment to the last query, but I wanted to say, our thanks to everybody for being here and taking their weekend to come to talk to us all. It's been an amazing experience, and I think one of the things I come away with, especially again for the session we just had, is quality of life. Like what defines that? And just to think, someone said they were taking 77 tablets a day, having to drink, 4 unpalatable drinks. Somehow we're not capturing how important that is for a person to sort of say, maybe I don't have to do that. Would that have, how much my quality of life would improve? I think on the clinical side, we see patients, we gather history, we interview our families, we know intimately the regimen, you write the prescriptions, but it's very different when you hear the testimonials of what it means to sort of have to do those drinks. And I had a flashback to when I was a med student, and one of the things I guess years ago, I don't even know if it's still done. I don't want to date myself too much, but you can guess how old I am. Medical students usually go in, and as part of your learning about inborn errors of metabolism, which unfortunately is sort of minimal, you have to try to drink PKU formula.
And now they're adding homocystinuria formula. So the answer is yes, the med students, the residents, the fellows, everybody gets a taste test that comes through our clinic. And it's PKU formula. It's one of the homocysteinurias. It's one of the mixers, and there's a urea cycle that's always it's usually in the list. It's been a little more difficult with the shortage of formulas to be able to find some extra, but yeah, they still get to do that.
Well, yeah, no, that's an interesting update. But I just remembered that, and just to hear about how it's, I just don't know how much it's gotten better. To hear how people are, talking about how terrible the drinks taste. So to me, that's really, really important as we think about trying to develop new therapies. Maybe that's even more important than making a level lower, having some other more medically quantitatable outcome. I think that's going to require joint research between all of us in the room to think about, how to incorporate those types of comments to going forward. So I was just going to share that comment about something that I really felt, that was just an amazing, riveting session. I agree. And I appreciate all the testimonies that people provided. It goes beyond that too, to try to think about how I'm going to inject myself, if I have visual impairment, things like that. This is just so important for quality of life. So I wanted to thank everybody for that. The next question was, how I got interested. So certainly everybody here would want to take a turn on this as well. But I did mention this a little bit when I give a talk yesterday. And I felt like I saw a serious problem in 1999 when I was a first-year medical genetics fellow at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Because as a system, we had introduced expanded newborn screening for a whole group of inborn errors of metabolism nearly instantaneously. And all of a sudden there was, the detection of 40-odd disorders with no organized next logical step, which is what's the natural history, what's the outcome, what's the treatment, what's the intervention. And so I was seeing this, and I can just remember, at the time, meeting many families with MMA. Some are here today, and cobalamin C. And the very first weekend I was on call was a Friday, and we were admitting a baby who had a newborn screen for an increased propionyl carnitine. And so for those, we all know, what the differential diagnosis was. We felt the baby had cobalamin C deficiency. The baby did have cobalamin C deficiency. We were standing around the bedside. We said, no one's ever seen this before. What happens to a baby when they have cobalamin C? And he was about a week old. What's going to happen? And we met the family by the bedside, and tried to sort of think, what are we going to tell the family? And I can remember we reached out to our good colleague and expert, David Rosenblatt, who has really been an international expert on diagnosing MMA and related cobalamin disorders, to sort of say, what could be the outcomes? We just had no idea. And later that summer, more and more newborn screens were coming in. For me, I was really involved with this because that year we had a shortage of fellows. So I was just really just mainly doing newborn screens that were positive, in many cases for propionyl carnitine, propionic acidemia, cobalamin C, MMA syndromes. And met a lot of families, again, that were in the very earliest stages of learning about the diagnosis. And the questions would be asked is, what's the treatment for my baby? And just to say, well, I remember this too. It was a sort of a poignant moment in my career. Going to the emergency room on my bike, riding in on a Saturday to meet a family who had a baby with increased propionyl carnitine and trying to explain to the family we thought it was MMA. And, then explain what, sort of in very basic terms what the condition was and how to treat it. And the family nearly instantaneously said, that's not really a treatment. I said, no, that's what we do, though. That's what we have right now to sort of quote unquote treat this condition. So that stimulated my interest, and the families supported me to get involved in research for this, for MMA related disorders. And another experience that was really, in my mind, a pivotal moment. And again, these are clinical anecdotes, and I'm going to pass the mic to the next person in a minute. But I was, I was a fellow on call, and one of our patients, who was one of the first ones ever in the world to receive a liver transplant for his MMA, the dad called me, and he said, patient's name has been started saying what was happening to his son, and his son had a very high fever, 104. He had varicella sepsis, so we don't see it as much anymore. But there was a day, probably a lot of the adults remember getting chicken pox, and he had this after transplant, and it's had a high fever, and it's pretty dangerous. And I just couldn't believe how he was describing and sort of calmly how his son was doing. I was ready to say, get to, are you in the emergency room? Are you driving over there? Where are you? He said, no, I'm admitted to the 5th floor of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, to the GI service. I said, oh my goodness. I was on the 7th floor, ran down there to see this boy and help the team adjust his diet, fluids, calorie load, etc. But he was actually doing okay. He was febrile and he was uncomfortable, but he was really protected by his liver transplant. For a patient that wouldn't be, have this type of an MMA problem and not have a protective organ, that could really be a really deadly event. And like I said, I went in and he wasn't getting enough calories. He wasn't getting the right types of fluids. Again, managed by the GI service. And not to anything against him. It just, he wasn't being treated like a metabolic patient. And he was quite stable. And it was just, to me, a really eye-opening experience that, there could be something that we could do. And at the time, that's the beginning days of AAV gene therapy, which has started me down the pathway that I'm still on. So that's my story. I'm glad to hear about others' experiences as well. Please.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about mentorship. So some of you know that I grew up in Nebraska. And there isn't a lot of population and there isn't a lot of opportunities. And so when I was in 2nd grade, we were driving, and I'm one of 6 kids, so 4 of us are in the car and my mother. We're driving, and she says, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, well, I'm going to be a teacher or a nurse. And she says, why is that? And I said, well, that's what women do, because that's all I had ever seen. And she stopped the car. And my mother was very, very formal. Like, this does not happen. You do not stop the car when there's 5 kids in the car. And she stops the car and she pulls over and she says, why don't you teach the teachers, and why don't you be the doctor who writes the orders for the nurses? All right, so that's my first kind of experience. And then my parents encouraged me, and as I said, I'm one of 6. I'm actually the oldest, and I thought DNA was fascinating. I had read some articles, I had it in high school biology in my freshman year. I thought DNA was incredibly fascinating. And lo and behold, when I was 16, I had the opportunity to be mentored by a wonderful woman who ends up being my PhD advisor, Dr. Eleanor Rogan, who brought me into her lab as a volunteer. And she's a PhD and she studies DNA. And she said, you cannot limit yourself. And at that point, I thought I was going to be a researcher. I thought I was going to be like Jen here. I thought I was going to get a PhD. And then I had an opportunity to spend a summer at NIH at the end of my freshman year in college. And Dr. Wendy at NIH took me under my wing, and I suddenly realized I could get an MD and a PhD. And then I said, okay, I'm going to go to med school. and get a PhD. And then I had Hobe Wiltsey and Brad Schaefer at the University of Nebraska. Brad is now, I think, in Arkansas, and he's a geneticist. And Hobe actually started newborn screening in the state of Nebraska. And I thought, this is really exciting. I really enjoy this patient population. And so then I do internal medicine and pediatrics because I'm like, adults with kids with genetic disease become adults with genetic disease. And I was mentored through there. And in fact, Jerry Vockley was at the University of Pittsburgh when I was there. And so had some mentorship there. And then I went actually to CHOP. And at that point, my mentor actually became the patients as much as the attendings. So we were trained by a lot of the same people, and those are all people that taught me how to take care of patients. But that's when I suddenly said, you know what, this is kind of for me. And it was taking care of a PA patient who unfortunately passed in my 4th year of fellowship. But I suddenly said, this is the patient population I really want to take care of, because they give as much back to me as I can give to them. And so that's kind of how I ended up. But it was all the mentors along the way, all the people that encouraged me to continue on. And so, you don't realize as patients and parents how much you become mentors to us, because we don't use that word, but you actually are.
What a wonderful thought, Kim. I totally agree with that. Learned so much about all the IEMs from the families that I've seen over the years. But so I had a sort of a long and winding road, but I always loved genetics since high school, biology. I had an awesome mentor, an awesome biology teacher who was really tough. And so it really made me study hard. And so I always liked genetics, but I didn't really know what you could do with that. So I went to college and I majored in biology, and then I'm like, well, what do you do with a biology degree? You go to grad school. So I went to grad school. I had no idea because when I went to school, there was no internet, right? So I didn't know about genetic counseling and, the field of medical genetics really at all. The Human Genome Project was just starting. And so Yeah, 1992 is when I started college. So my mom actually got this letter in the mail, a newsletter from her college, and it was a story about a genetic counselor. And that's how I found out about the field of genetic counseling. But at that time, I really felt I wasn't I just didn't feel mature enough to deal with some of the issues so I did go to meet her, and she was at AI DuPont in Delaware. But I just felt like, I can't handle that right now. So I went to grad school, and I was doing my research, and I ended up discovering a couple genes in grad school, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but it ended up being really exciting. But I always wondered, well, what do those genes do in human physiology? And I'm not really satisfied with just at the bench, just trying to figure that out. And so I decided in the middle of my PhD, okay, I'm going to do something clinical. So I revisited genetic counseling, and I ended up going after my PhD to get a genetic counseling degree at Northwestern. And then I had a wonderful training there, and ended up going to just a conference, and I met my future boss, Les Biesecker there, who had a job at NIH. And I think I'm like, this is the perfect job for me, because I have the science background, I have the clinical, and this is like the perfect combination. And then I came for the interview. I met Chuck. Never heard of MMA before in my life, because we didn't see any patients with that in clinic in my training. And I was like, okay, I can do this. I'll try it out. I'm so happy I did. It was the best decision I ever made, was to come to NIH and work with Chuck. And we were just a very small group of Dr. Venditti, half of me, because I did another half of a job on NF1. And and then Randy in the lab. And so we kind of built our study on MMA, and there was a point where I had to sort of decide, do I want to keep continuing on MMA or working on NF or some other conditions. And I really loved inborn errors of metabolism because you can do something. There's therapies, we could change the lives of patients, and most people in genetics are usually not as interested in the biochemical genetics. So, so it's been a really exciting ride. I love my job. Now I get to do, clinical genetic counseling and research in the lab, and it's just the perfect combination for me and my very weird background. It's a long road, but I want to echo what Kim said, that I've learned so much from many of you in the room over the years, and it truly inspires me every single day to keep working towards new treatments for the disorders that we study in our lab. So anyway, sorry, so long. I'll pass it on.
So I found myself now in a position, I think, as I kind of described earlier, where the mission and the purpose that I have is to not only interact with communities like yours and to collect samples, but really to get them into the hands of as many researchers as possible. And that sharing aspect is something that I really enjoy. My background is in genetics and genomics, and I'm actually a trained evolutionary biologist, so a little bit out of the box of what we're, what I'm doing today and what we're all here doing today. But I found that a common problem in research, and I think it's really because the incentive structure and the system is set up in the way that, scientists and researchers are not incentivized to share and not incentivized to work together until they publish the results or until they get the grant money that they need. And that was always something that frustrated me, even working in labs, working with patients. I've worked in labs where we study animals, and no matter the setting, I've always found that to be the case. And so to be in a position now where I can catalyze as much research as possible is really exciting, and I am very kind of happy to be in that position now. And I'll keep it short. So.
Well, I have to say I admire all of you, everyone up here and everyone in the audience that just helps each other. I just wanted to mention that. Patients and even their children, and just from the doctors, I just want to applaud everyone here that's just in it together for just forever. So my background had nothing to do with medical foods. I didn't know what the heck inborn errors of metabolism is. I don't know anything, and my background does not come from any of this. My background is hospice and palliative care services, working with bariatric services and palliative care. Then I studied to become a certified medical biller coder specialist, trying to figure out, okay, which direction in my life. I came from the corporate world, marketing. I came from New York City, running 7 different hotels and restaurants in New York City, Tavern on the Green, the 21 Club, all that. 9/11 happened. I had no choice but to move to New Jersey, and that's where my journey started. I worked for a CPA firm and did marketing and sold CPA services, and then moved to the medical career, which I had no idea I was going to fall into, but my journey is more on a spiritual level. My journey is a spiritual level. To make a long story short, I was going through a rough patch in my life, and I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I moved to San Diego, which I have family there. I didn't like it. Then I went to Tucson, Arizona, trying to figure out, am I supposed to stay here to the West Coast, on the East Coast? And I kept getting sick, and asthma, bronchitis. I don't know what was out there, the sandstorms, whatever else it was happening out there. I'm like, I can't breathe out here, it's too hot. But anyway, I was going through a challenge, And I believe everybody goes through challenges in life. And I was going through my spiritual challenge. And I just kept getting sick to the point where, okay, what am I going to do next? So I actually asked God for a position as an angel on earth. And I wrote a letter to him in the Bible asking, can you give me a position where I can help people here on this planet? So anyway, make a long story short, moved back to the East Coast, to New Jersey, right? And things just started falling into my lap, the medical field. So I had to pick something. So I picked being a certified medical biller and coder specialist. Little did I know that I would need that to help patients in the future. So I learned that, and that's how I joined the rest of the palliative care and what me have you. So I applied for a position as an insurance coverage specialist for Applied Nutrition Corp., which was bought out by Nutrition North America. This was the year of 2011, I believe, something like that. And it was a mom and pop medical food manufacturing company. I'm like, what the heck? This is totally out of my league, you know? Okay, so medical food, they hired an insurance coverage specialist. What they were trying to do was develop a coverage department to help these rare disease patients get covered for their formula and their supplements. I'm like, okay. So they hired me on the spot, and I started learning a little bit more about the genetic community and the rare disease community, and I utilized my experience as a certified medical biller coder specialist and introduce that into the same area as coverage for the medical foods. So when I got there, the issue was patients, clinicians, doctors all around were thinking that this was mostly a pharmacy benefit, right? So, and of course, if anyone gets a prescription, typically you go to the pharmacy, right? I mean, that I would do that, you know. So it turned out that with my experience, this is covered under medical, a durable medical equipment benefit. So from there, I turned around that whole coverage department in Applied Nutrition Corp. And I was able to get a lot of their customers covered under durable medical equipment. And I developed relationships with dietitians and clinicians around the United States, with Mount Sinai Hospital, with Newborn Screening of Nebraska, just a ton of different clinics across the board that would switch their patients' formula to Phenolate Essential and the Applied Nutrition Corp., what Ann Starr used to call it. They used to switch their patients' formula because I was getting them covered under DME benefits. Okay, great. And from there, I would work one-on-one with patients and then started to hear the patients and their family stories. That's what changed my whole outlook on things. Listening to the stories and them they're just crying out for help. And I had a patient that had 6 kids that all had PKU. They had to foreclose on their home and move into an apartment with these 6 children because pharmacy wasn't covering their medical foods. Can you imagine 6 children with PKU? And just listening to these sad stories and feeling compassionate for them and sad, whatever. It was just a challenging experience for me where I felt like I needed to do something more, right? So to make a long story short, Applied Nutrition Corp. Was bought out by Nutrition North America, and I left. I said, I'm not going to stay here and work for a bigger company. I'm just going to open up my own little business and and took my relationships with my clinicians across the board and my patients, I just felt like I would be abandoning them. So I took them with me, and I had nothing in the bank account, nothing. I was late on my rent, everything. I just felt like it was it. It was it. I don't care. I can't stay here working for this company. And I decided to open up Compassion Works Medical, because compassion is the key to helping people, is your compassion, right? So that's the secret to success, to making friendships, relationships, everything. So I just started Compassion Works Medical. I connected with Christine Brown at the National PKU Alliance, and she gave me a position as an insurance coaching expert. I worked for her for 5 years and helped the National PKU Alliance patients get covered for their medical foods, and including low protein foods, just so you know, supplements and everything. And then I met Danae at the National PKU Alliance conference. And she introduced the homocystinuria group. And I'm like, huh, what's that? You know, I'm learning a lot of different challenges here. And I got in touch with Danae, and we just expanded from there. Compassion Works was now starting to grow. I received a contract with Cambrook. I received a contract with a company called Liquid Hope, which is functional formularies. They help patients that have cancer or other disorders. So I go outside even from that.
We're getting the time.
And so, anyway, just so you know, we have no more time. I can go on and on and on. But that's basically a spiritual journey for myself, and I just thought to share that. No experience, just jumped into it, and I felt it was meant to be.
We're going to finish going down the line, and then we're going to go into closing remarks. So, but I think it's interesting for us to hear these perspectives and see how how we've impacted you too. So,
if anybody has questions for me, I can meet you out in the hall because I don't want to take up that time. Why I came into this was because I have no background in science. I didn't even like it, but data has allowed me to get tests for my daughter. It's allowed me to get services for my daughter in the school system. It is changing things. So all of the money and all the effort that her diseases organization spent for 10 years to do something that was mediocre because we didn't know any better. So I was hired at RareX basically to share my mistakes and make sure that organizations like yours don't have to make them. And make sure that when you answer questions, that all of that data gets in the hands of all of these people who want so desperately to do the right thing. And going back to the original question, what did you learn today? I learned from a pharmaceutical company that they're looking to recruit people out of RareX, and we have a short window to get you guys in. So I'm just saying, get your data in ASAP because this is already ready to work for you. It's a pleasure to meet you guys.
Yes, I'm going to keep it very short too. But I wanted to make the comment because to reflect on what Johnny, our nice patient, said earlier, that all of you are an inspiration. I had a brother who had this developmental delay and special needs. And it's very personal for me, as it is for many families and many doctors and many nurses. And many of our families became a nurse, and siblings became doctors, and siblings became nurses and dietitians and all of that, because yes, you want to take care of your family member, you want to be the expert on the field, and that, of course, was my passion since ever. I remember myself that I was going to be a doctor and I was going to do the hardest thing possible, and I just loved medicine, everything in it, like the lab, the mass room, the clinic, all of it. And I've been in Greece and England and here, and and in every patient and every family, I see my family and my brother, and he passed away, and I do it all in his memory, in his honor. And I think many of us here have similar stories. So for many of us, it's very personal, and we love doing it, and we will do it with all our heart for as long as it takes.
I'll keep it brief as well. So I think our careers are shaped by many different forces. One of them is our just natural inclinations. Some people look at the biochemical pathways and just like, oh. And some people look at the biochemical pathways as like, I love it. I think all of us, right? Yeah, share that passion. The second thing is our deep held convictions. And what brings all of us here together is the needs of our patients and families that we serve. And the third thing is opportunities. And unfortunately, it doesn't always happen in our lives when all of those three things come together in one moment. But it did happen in my life in 2014. Chuck and we had a conversation. It was ASHAG, I think, where Chuck said, I may have an opening for a physician in my group. One thing led to another. The rest is history. And I never looked back. It was one of the best decisions I've made in my life. So, and of course, that created a new chapter in my life where the students I work with, the families I work with, patients that we encounter became our mentors. And again, just a wonderful experience all in all. Thank you.
Danae is letting me ask one last question, but I'm only going to ask two to answer it. I'll tell you what the question is, but we'd like to have everyone leave this meeting thinking about hope for the future. And so I'm going to ask Kim and Dr. Vendetti so that we could talk to both the homocystinuria patients and we can talk to the organic acidemia patients. And if I've picked the wrong people, pass the microphone. What should the patients and families leaving here today, what should give them the greatest hope for the future?
So I am assuming that I'm addressing the homocystinuria. So it's been like 5 years since the first meeting, right? I am incredibly encouraged by the amount of progress that we've had in all of the homocystinuria in terms of therapies, in terms of the knowledge about the natural history, in terms of the progress we have made to really try to make everyone's life better. I mean, I think we can talk about CVS and the fact that we're now talking about new therapies, but I think we can also talk about the choline remethylation defects and MTHFR, that we're now even entertaining that we can have new therapies and starting to push researchers like Dr. Sloan and Dr. Venditti and Dr. Manoli. Sorry, Oleg. Yeah, Dr. Oleg. So that we can start pushing towards looking for additional and new therapies, but also expanding the therapies that we have. 5 years ago, we were talking about a research map, and it was a page. Now we have Travere, who I think was sitting in the back corner back there, who has an enzyme replacement in trial. This is a huge amount of progress in the last 5 years. The question is, how much progress can we cause in the next 5 years? Our conversation should be very different in 2 meetings from now, 3 meetings from now. And I'm really enthusiastic about the amount of things that we have accomplished, even outside the therapeutics, in terms of the return to care pamphlets, in terms of the clinic pamphlets, in terms of the patient information pamphlets. Like, we've done a lot of work in the last 5 years only with your assistance, because without patients and caregivers, we could not have made that progress.
I think the message that maybe a general one for the families and everybody listening is, it's sort of a saying that a rising tide floats all boats. And at this time, we are in a rejuvenation of the field of, I will call it genomic medicine. And I think you've heard the testimonies from the team of this boat, and we have a good crew, and you are all on the team. So I'm very hopeful that we are going to use some of these techniques that the whole field is working on, and we are contributing, but it's an entire effort to bring these new treatments to the patients. And, we can get it to work for MMA. We can get it to work for MMA-B deficiency, PCCA, B, CBLC. It will work. And some of the disorders are in front of the other ones. But we are all going to do this together. And the time is I think, there have been two, again, my centricity is towards gene therapies. But there's at least two that have been approved already, and I mentioned one the other day when I gave a talk for a disorder that everybody on this panel would agree, if they were to go back 10 years in time, would say this is absolutely impossible, it's not treatable, it's a 100% fatal disorder, it's not worth screening for. Now we are going to screen all babies for this other neurologic condition because there's a gene therapy to treat it. And the patients can now live and have, the outcome is under study, but they can live and they can potentially have a normal life. So that's what I would close with. And I thank everybody again for all your comments and inspiration.
I'm in charge of closing remarks, but thank you, Aaron, for stepping in here and helping. But, I think I want to step up here just so that I'm not blocked by things. But one of the things that I think what I was hearing from each and every person on this panel is that our patient stories, our families impact them. We motivate them. We drive them. We are their real heroes. And so, what we can do to help them is to get involved and to share our voices, to share our experiences so that they can do their best work and we can help, create new therapies. Because it is a team effort. We are definitely all in this together. And as a patient myself, it's absolutely exciting to see the things that are happening for gene therapy, even if it's not for classical homocystinuria. Just watching what's happening for the cobalamin disorders and MMA at the NIH, it's so exciting. When I was diagnosed at 10, we were told our life expectancy was 30. And to know now that I'm well into my 30s and the idea of a potential maybe cure, that's like identifying a unicorn. You would never expect to see a unicorn in the wild. We know what a unicorn is, but the word cure was like that. And now we have the real possibility of in our lifetimes, maybe not, well, it still could be my lifetime, but we have that real possibility, but we need to be participating if we're going to help get where we want to. And so it's an exciting time as a patient. I think it's an exciting time for the researchers and the doctors because now they're really be able to do so much more for their patients. And so I just want you to leave here with there's so much hope. It's an exciting time. And so I just thank you guys for all coming. And I hope you enjoyed, and I hope we all stay connected because I think, as Chuck said, it is all very much a team effort and we all motivate each other. So thank you so much.